皆さん、こんにちは。
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen.
I hope everybody's had a very productive and insightful 2 days. 2 more sessions to go until we close, and we have a great panel consisting of 3 prominent venture capitalists / accelerators. And you might notice that there seems to apparently be a dress code for this session, which I missed. So jacket and blue jeans. But George said you got changed from light blue jeans to dark blue jeans for this session?
Yesterday I was wearing black jeans, a little more formal.
So should we go make him change his pants before we start?
Yeah, take your coat off.
I'll take my tie off when you guys are speaking.
All right.
Okay, so maybe we'll get started with a brief introduction from each of you, and maybe if you can comment on the defining moment when you knew you wanted to be a venture capitalist. As part of your introduction, that would be great. And also what you love about your job. I think one of the objectives of this session is for everyone to get a better understanding of what a venture capitalist actually is and how you really help promote entrepreneurship beyond deploying capital. So with that, maybe David, can you kick us off?
Sure. My name is David Lee. I started SV Angel in 2009 with a gentleman named Ron Conway. Since that time, we've made investments in companies like Twitter, Pinterest, Square, Dropbox, Airbnb, and Stripe. And we've also made investments in many companies that aren't those companies that didn't fare so well. So we focus primarily on consumer internet, and now I call that just the mobile internet. And we were talking backstage, and I think that they're now, in addition to the consumer or the mobile internet, there are more diverse areas, and it's never been a more exciting time to be an entrepreneur or in technology. I truly believe that what will happen in the next 10 years will be as transformative, if not more, than what's happened in the last 20. So I'm honored to be here. This is my first time in Tokyo, and I look forward to a very good discussion. I think the first time that I knew I wanted to be a venture capitalist, my dad was the first entrepreneur that I knew. He was an entrepreneur. He has a technical degree. He built the first fully automated fortune cookie machine. And before his machine, they made it by hand. And I saw how hard it was, and I realized I couldn't be that person, but I could help that person. And I think that's what a venture capitalist does.
So all the fortune cookies we consume in Chinatown was made by your father, basically?
At some point in the 1980s,
okay.
Yes. And then, so I always was looking to be an advisor to entrepreneurs. And while I was working at Google, I met Ron Conway, who became a mentor to me, and that was around 2007, and that's when I decided to pursue this as a career.
Great. So thank you for that introduction. It's your first time here in Tokyo.
Yes.
How have you enjoyed it so far?
It's been great. It's a city that has an incredible amount of energy. Entrepreneurial energy, great architecture, great culture, great food, and so this is it's something that's been a real highlight of my year.
Great, welcome. Next, Akio Tanaka. You usually sit in this seat.
I'm not used to speaking.
Interrogating us as panelists, so it's a good, nice change to see you as a panelist. I'm sure many of us know you quite well, but can you kick us off with the introduction?
Sure. Actually, let me start with the question Iwase-san you asked, which was, what was the moment that I wanted to become a VC? Actually, I never wanted to become a VC. That was not how I started my career. I was an entrepreneur back then during the first wave of Internet 1.0. I was actually at the time in Canada, and we had our startup. Later, we actually had an exit to a US software company. And after that, actually, that software company merged into Macromedia, and through those events, I actually ended up joining Macromedia, and they actually put me in Tokyo as the CTO of Macromedia Japan at the time. And so I was actually always on the product and technology side. And two things that are happening in early 2000s in Japan, which was the first wave of mobile internet. This is pre-iPhone, but the era of iMode. And that actually made a lot of new innovations, especially around mobile multimedia. And we were the provider of technology called the Flash at the time. So that became so big in Japan, and we are suddenly making more mobile revenue for entire macro media than any other regions out of a very short period of time. And during that time, one day our US CEO came to Asia, and he asked me to join a shopping tour. And I told him, "Oh, we are very busy with launch of new product. I don't have time to be joining with your shopping tour." But he said, "No, you must. Your travel arrangement already made, so you're coming with me on the shopping tour." So I had no idea what, I thought maybe we had to go to Hong Kong and go to some boutiques with him. But it turns out he wasn't interested in buying luxury items in Hong Kong. He actually wanted to buy companies. So he took me on a tour of Korea, Beijing, Shanghai, Seoul, Beijing, Shanghai, and Taipei. And basically, we're meeting up with all the internet startup at the time. And basically, his theory was that even though company was based in North America, but he felt new wave of innovation coming from Asia, especially in the mobile and even in the video space. And he felt there's no way the company can innovate fast enough. So the only way to absorb some of those innovations was either through investment or M&A. So after this trip, basically he asked me to stop what I was doing in Japan and go back with him to the US and work under him to start working on the Asia M&A and investment program. That's how I accidentally ended up becoming a VC. But during that trip, actually there's something amazing happened. I was born in Japan, but I grew up in North America. I thought, in my mind, actually China didn't exist. It was probably the last place I wanted to go. And I didn't, I actually had never been to China except for Hong Kong until 2004, when the first time our CEO took me there. And at the time I expected, it's kind of backward country. I'm not sure what internet industry exists there. And during the first day, I met with 10 entrepreneurs from China. And these are kind of rough on the edges, but these companies had an amazing number of users. Like, startup with two-year-old startup with 10 million users, and others were already doing, some incredible amount of revenue. And back in 2004, and I realized that while in Japan we're, enjoying some of the advanced technologies in mobile, but China was not quite advanced, but the internet sector there was growing so fast. And I realized, wow, this is the wild frontier. And, I had a very comfortable life here in Japan, but I felt, wow, it's much more interesting to go after the wild frontier and see what's happened there. And that's how I actually ended up becoming a VC. And I want to actually go back to the slide that I actually prepared just to explain, put everything in context. So I'm part of Infinity Ventures, and we actually run the Red Circle in Asia. So I'm the co-founder of the Asia Fund that operates both in China and Japan. We are early stage VC in the region, which in our language means we invest in either seed stage like David and George does, but we also fall into a later round, usually Series A and up to B. And we also have actually partner fund. They are all early stage funds in Europe, based in Hamburg and Berlin, and Russia, Moscow, and of course US, San Francisco, and Brazil. And together we actually share a lot of ideas, but also have some incubation, early stage startup co-working spaces. So that's what those circles mean. And there's one slide actually I thought would be interesting to show. And this data comes from World Startup Report, an entrepreneur from US, actually Taiwanese American, who's actually built this report. And you'll actually see interesting circles here. And the big circle represents number of internet startups. I think this is number from 2013. And you can see US is definitely big, but if you look at it in Asia, actually China's circle is also quite big. And the red numbers underneath the name of the country is the number of internet firms that are valued over $1 billion. I think in the last year we had a lot of inflation going on, so I think those numbers increased a lot, both in US and China. But you can actually see Silicon Valley is still the center of the tech world, but there are a lot of hotspots globally. And you can see actually Europe, UK, and Germany is quite big. And Brazil is still small, but it's up and coming. And this is the global landscape of, I think, startups. And we only operate in some of the key markets, but our friend here, George, basically, he's in every circle, I think, except for the Arctic, maybe.
Over 40 countries.
Yeah. So just to also introduce what we do, apart from investing as a startup early stage VC, we also actually are investing into ecosystems. So I want to show you a couple of things. So in China, in Beijing, we last year launched the largest co-working space in Beijing called Tech Temple. And this is the photo of the Tech Temple. And we actually have an open seating plan that seats about 280 people in total. And currently, this is the largest co-working space for internet startups. And it's open not just to our portfolio, but it's also basically open to any entrepreneurs in this space that are, we consider to be good and decent, and they can move in and work out of here until they grow into a bigger size where they need a dedicated office. So we are investing into the ecosystem, and this is where also we see a lot of hackathons and all the developer events happening on the weekends in Beijing. So that's an investment in the physical ecosystem. And then last year we also made an investment in Angel List of China. So I think many of us are familiar with Angel List in the US that actually has the largest database of startups and becoming the online ecosystem for startup companies in the West. But in China, there's a platform called 36KR, and this is currently the largest database of Chinese-speaking companies in the internet space. And I just want to show you some numbers. It might be hard to see, but this is the actually number of startup projects that's currently in the database. So there's about 17,000 startup companies in here. And just put this in a perspective, we actually first met with the team about a year ago. At the time, there were only 10,000. So less than a year, they actually added 7,000 new businesses or new projects, so to speak. And it's quite significant. And I think definitely it's not quite the size of Angel List yet, but it's fast catching up, which also I think is reflected in the big circle we saw earlier. But the next one, which is actually interesting, these guys are also building database of entrepreneurs, especially the serial entrepreneurs who are actually launching companies one after another. And there are about 5,200, over 5,000 entrepreneurs that are active in the tech space. And lastly, we actually have also a database of VCs and angels. There are actually about 700 plus people listed in here. So now this is, I think, kind of you can see the scale of ecosystem that's building up here. Definitely not quite the same scale as San Francisco yet, but I think China is quite catching up. And of course, sitting here, our hope is that we get, more of that similar level of activities in Japan. I think, given the economy size of the Japan economy, I think we are not quite there yet. But I think our neighbors are actually showing that it's possible. And we also want to show that Teresa is actually one of our partners in China. So we actually have female VC here, and I think George can say a few more things about his next presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. I think it's interesting you were highlighting China as another place where entrepreneurship is really spurring. And we here in Japan tend to look at Silicon Valley as an example and a place to learn. And we were chatting about this briefly backstage, David. So maybe it'll be, I won't get into details yet, but it might be interesting to discuss what implication this has for policymakers in Japan that is really trying to promote entrepreneurship. So we'll get back to that later. So George, please.
Yes, I'm going to stand up.
All right.
Yes.
George.
Sorry. That's better. Minna genki? Genki?
How are you? You don't sound too genki. How are you feeling? Are you okay? Yes? You feeling good?
Thank you to Tani-san and Jane for hosting this event. This is great. Japan needs more of this, so thank you very much. Yes, please, round of applause. じゃあ日本語で頑張ります。
Okay, so I'll try to speak in Japanese. I am George Kellerman of 500 Startups. Nice to meet you. 500 Startups is a venture capital fund as well as a startup incubator. And we have been investing in more than 700 startups in 4 years, and about 10 of them are Japanese investees. So when was that decisive moment when I wanted to become a VC? Well, about 4 years ago, I was a consultant, and I was a mentor for various companies, many companies. And during that time, I thought, well, rather than just giving advice, if I could give them funding, it'll help them even more. So I decided to start my own fund. And in Japan, I decided to establish an incubator here in Japan. However, in the meantime, Dave McClure, the founder of 500 Startups, and I met, and I decided to work for 500 Startups.
All right. I already said that. So,
well, today's panel is about venture capitalists. But before going to that topic, I would like to share with you one story. It's a real story, by the way. This is something that really happened.
申し訳ないです。そう、数ヶ月前。
Several months ago, there was a couple who was walking in their backyard, and they found a rusty old can. This is a true story. It's the actual can that they found, by the way. And inside the can, they found many, many golden coins. They found many coins. And when they dug deeper, they found many other cans. And from all of these cans, they found a total of 1,427 gold coins. And on average, these coins dated back 150 years and were valued at a total of 1 billion yen. So why am I talking about coin? This is because this is very similar to the Japanese economy. Major firms in Japan have stashed away close to 150 trillion yen's worth of cash. However, I said 150 trillion yen of cash. This is not assets. They have that much cash stashed away. But that cash is buried deep in their backyards. Why? Do you know why? Why? If these companies invest that cash in the economy, this will, of course, make the economy turn.
Let's dig it up. では、日本の大手企業に
So, my challenge to major firms in Japan, before the end of this year, you must use that 0.1% of the 150 trillion yen in cash, only 0.1%. That's a total of 150 billion yen, by the way. And with that money, you must either acquire a startup or establish a corporate fund or invest in other VC funds. Do it. Do it. Before the end of the year. April 1st is the start of the new accounting year, fiscal year. You have 12 months to work on it. So let's do it. By the way, actually, there are things even more valuable than cash that's buried deep underground. Do you know what it is?
Something. People. 女性の力。
Female power, the power of women. If you really want to achieve economic growth, now is the time. Now is the time. Not tomorrow, not the day after tomorrow, today. Today is the time to start using leveraging female power. Women are not only capable office ladies or employees, they can be board members, they can be managers, entrepreneurs, they can be investors. All of these people should become female. My wife and my daughters. Well, I'm the only male in the family, by the way. So I truly believe this. I really believe this. The biggest challenge today is to create a society where women are given an equal opportunity to work as men. And my 2 children are in high school yet. They're high schoolers. But if they say that they want to work in Japan, I'll probably say no, not in Japan. Because they don't have opportunities. So let's work together so that my daughters who are half Japanese can land good jobs in Japan.
Thank you for a very inspiring opening remark, George. So you touched upon a couple of important topics, but maybe we can start with the role of large corporations in promoting entrepreneurship. So
can I jump right in there?
Please.
Large corporations. So I'm going to speak in English now for David, and but large corporations all used to be startups. Every large corporation, Rakuten, Mikitani-san can tell you, he was a startup at one time. Every large corporation. You're still a startup. Good. I like that attitude. So, they play a very important role in that they themselves are startups and they have to support startups.
David, so in the US, we hear a lot about the Facebooks and the Twitters of the world, but where does the large traditional corporations fit in the ecosystem, if at all?
I think in the U.S., the large corporations, at least in the life cycle of a technology company, historically haven't played a huge role. They will sometimes invest in companies or enter into strategic partnerships. So, for example, probably the most famous example is Yahoo doing a distribution deal with Google in Google's early days, and Yahoo taking warrants in Google. But historically in the US, there's been less involvement in terms of funding startups, and that funding has come from venture capitalists, investment banks, and the public markets.
Akio, why are Japanese large corporations, why have they been historically unsuccessful in unleashing the potential that's locked in there, may it be technology or people or other assets?
I think there might be some people from the large corporations here, so I'm going to probably end up offending, but I think biggest problem in Japan, I think probably goes back to Jerry Young's comment this morning. People in large corporations are very comfortable. They have no need to innovate fast or do something drastic because it's not going to make a huge difference for them, in the short term. And I think not all companies, but there are basically very large ships that are sinking slowly, but it's not going to sink tomorrow. But when it actually starts really sinking fast, it goes really fast. We've seen those examples in the past, but it's still, for the most part, it's sinking slowly. So I don't think there is incentive to innovate. However, I think important challenge here is that Japan is no longer, country of tech startup. There are actually large technology companies like Rakuten and Yahoo, DNA Agree, and so on. And I think those companies, has actually important, role to play. I think US, some of the larger tech companies have been actually avid buyers of startup companies and actually recirculating both capital and human resources. And I think there's actually very positive circulation of both talent and money going on there already. And China actually didn't have that circulation until recently, but about 3-4 years ago, something really changed. Large Chinese internet companies like Baidu, Alibaba, Tencent, their attitude previously was, if there's an interesting startup, they look at it, okay, you got an interesting business model, but we're not going to buy it. We'll just copy the same thing internally. It's quicker and cheaper. So they use startup ecosystem for inspirations for ideas, but they didn't buy them. But now it's very different. In the last 3-4 years, there's been tremendous amount of corporate money from large tech companies in China going to startup, either in the forms of investment or M&A. And I think if you look at the last quarter, I think the biggest investors in China are no longer VCs. They're actually large tech companies. And I don't see that happening in Japan yet. And I think that's probably one of the things that could help kickstart the ecosystem here. And if George is saying, Japanese big corporations should invest 0.1%, but Japanese large tech companies should invest even larger portion of their money into the startup ecosystem.
Yeah, actually, that's actually a really good point.
What would be a goal that you would set up for them?
1% even.
1%.
10%. I mean, it depends on how much cash they have.
Mikitani-san has a lot of cash.
I think one role that that is important for many of the founders, one of the aspects that you see in Silicon Valley is that you see an aspect of helping other younger entrepreneurs and being a mentor and role models. And I think over time that will evolve with any technology community. And so that the executives, the founders, they can all be mentors and role models for the younger generation. That, I think, is just as important, if not more important, than the financial capital.
Yeah,
Right.
Actually, I would fall on that. There's a cultural difference here, too. A lot of times when somebody gets a job at a large corporation and they sign their employment agreements and the paperwork, there's a restriction that says, I will not work for anyone else. I will not help any other company, or I won't do anything that might be competitive. At our accelerator, the people who are mentoring our startups, the people that come in, they work for Google, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook. Their companies want them to be mentors. Their companies want them to go out there and learn and work with startups and find out what's going on in the marketplace. So I think there's a big difference there. And that's one thing that Japanese corporations can do, is they can encourage their employees to go out and mentor startups. It's free. It doesn't cost them anything. And if they let them do it on their work time, they're actually getting paid for it.
I think we're starting to talk about the importance of ecosystems in promoting entrepreneurship, and often the issue seems to focus on the lack of capital in Japan. Going into the venture community.
There's capital. There's 150 shoen.
Right. So I think what I want to dig in a little bit more is that there is abundance of capital, and all good entrepreneurs that I know have been able to raise whatever money they need. So what is it beyond just pure cash that's really required to accelerate the entrepreneurship as a whole? And what role do you all play as a venture capitalist, an investor, early investor, to help companies grow faster and grow bigger?
So in addition to money, we try to give venture capitalists or investors or advisors, try to help companies in helping them grow. And it usually can come in one of three ways: helping them hire good people, so you spend a lot of time recruiting talent. Another way is business development and corporate development, and helping them think about, okay, who can we introduce to help, what business deals are very necessary for the company to get it to the next level. And then the third level is just overall business advice and operational advice. Many of these people who start companies have never run businesses before. They've never managed people before. And so if you can provide that mentorship, that coaching, I think that is invaluable, and that's what the entrepreneurs look for above and beyond the financial capital.
I think it's a very good point, but I think there's a structural problem in Japan that's not happening, and it's very simple. If you look at us here, the panelists here, we are all VCs, but we actually previously had operating role in tech companies. So we actually all were entrepreneurs at one point. But the typical profile of VCs in Japan are not people with the tech operating entrepreneurial background. They're actually bankers, of people from financial industry. I'm probably going to end up offending all of them, but those people cannot add a lot of value beyond money because that's not what they have done previously. So I think one of the interesting opportunity and challenge for Japan is to actually have more of the entrepreneurs becoming also VCs. I think the majority of active VC investors in US actually do come from tech background. And I think that's something missing in a big way. So I'm hoping that some of the successful entrepreneurs in Japan, if they're thinking about retirement, don't retire, come back to the industry as a form of mentor and an investor. And I think that would be a huge boost to the ecosystem.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's a huge problem. And actually in Silicon Valley, though, we've seen a shift over the last 10 years. Many of the new venture capital funds are run by former operators, myself included. I worked at Yahoo, I worked at Dell. Dave McClure worked at PayPal and had also done some engineering work. Mark Andreessen. A lot of the big famous VCs now actually have operating backgrounds. And that really is important to kind of go back to what David was saying. You have to be able to provide some kind of value, and it's more than the money. Actually, the money's really the easy part. Because it's a commodity and you can find people that'll give you money, but finding someone with know-how and experience that's relevant can be very difficult.
If a young entrepreneur came to you and asked for advice, whether he should take money from investor A, who is giving him a high valuation, but who's not necessarily experienced, and then investor B, who is very strict, has low valuation, but has a lot of experience, would you, no doubt, advise him to take money from the second investor?
For me, I think it's a very hard question to answer because it very much depends on the entrepreneur, their industry, their experience level. There's a trend in the US, for example, because entrepreneurship is becoming so well known, the best practices are widely available. There's a shift towards taking a higher valuation with less value add. So it's very hard to generalize in that situation. And one wrinkle that I will say, I think you're seeing a shift. I do agree you're seeing a shift of investors with more traditional, operating experience, for example, starting a company. But it wasn't always that way in the US. If you look historically at some of the best venture capitalists of all time in the US, Mike Moritz, John Doerr, they didn't start companies. They had different backgrounds. And so you have to start somewhere. And I think I wouldn't discourage I think a lot of these best practices can be learned. You don't necessarily have to be or start a company in order to be a great advisor, but I do think you need to have the compassion and the empathy to understand what the founder is going through. So to your original question, I'd say it's very hard to say, and it depends on the founder and his or her capabilities and experience.
Makes sense. Yeah. So you all invest in relatively early stage businesses. How do you figure out who will be successful or not? What are the key traits that you look for in aspiring entrepreneurs? That's question one. And then somewhat related, but not necessarily the same question. Can you name one example where you either had the opportunity to invest and missed the huge opportunity, or you were looking at it, thought it was a crazy business, and it turned out to be a big home run? So maybe start with you, George.
I've only been so I'm going to answer the second question first. I've only been a venture capitalist for 2 years, so I don't really have that big miss. But Dave McClure, our founding partner, he had the opportunity to invest in Uber in the early days and in Fab in the first round, and he passed on both of them. So it happens. But back to your first question, how do you know who's going to be successful? You don't. In fact, that's, I think, why we invest in such a large portfolio. All of us up here have very large portfolios. We're investing in a lot of companies with the hope that we're going to be able to provide value to some of them and that they're going to be able to grow. But it still comes down to, at least at the stage we're investing, it's so early stage, it really comes down to the team and the people, the market that they're going after. Is there some rational basis for investing in that market? But in terms of like being able to point at one thing and say that's going to determine success, it's really impossible.
So I think the big one that I missed while I was actually, this is my previous fund when I was running a corporate venture for Adobe. I think we had actually opportunity to invest a company called Tuna, which is a large travel portal site in China, which went IPO in the US. Well, yeah, Fritz's company. And at the time we thought, well, China has a lot of traffic, but margins are so low in travel, and we basically passed. And of course now it's a multi-billion-dollar company. And I think we've learned lessons since that. I think companies that are scaling, even if the monetization isn't clear, actually has huge value as long as they're in the right market. And since then, I think we've been looking at many companies, and so I've been doing VC investment almost 10 years. And I don't think, George is right. I don't think there's a set formula that we don't have a 20/20 vision, but I do, personally, I have a bias. I actually tend to like technical founders, people who actually have engineering and a more geeky background, and partly because I come from a developer background myself. But I think if you look at some of the largest internet companies, there are always exceptions, but actually tremendous amount of them actually come from very strong technical background. Certainly it's the case in China. Companies like Tencent, Baidu, they're all engineering. Alibaba is a bit different. Obviously, there's always an exception. High school teacher can also become a successful entrepreneur. However, in majority of the cases where I've seen strong internet companies, I have always found that having a technical founder or co-founder is a key.
I think for me, I agree. It's you look for certain things, but that doesn't necessarily mean they will succeed. If anything, 9 times out of 10 they fail. One of the things that I look for, or one of the things that really motivates me or makes me want to invest, actually Ben Silberman in his talk today said it better than anybody. And he talked about why he started Pinterest. And he said, I wanted to do what I did as a kid on the internet. And if you think about a lot of these founders, or Jack Dorsey, when he started Twitter, he would talk about when he was younger, he was obsessed with listening to the police radio and who was doing what. And he was obsessed with location. And so that lifelong obsession with a problem, or Sergey and Larry, their research in data mining and organizing information, that lifelong obsession with a problem is something that really resonates with me. And that ties to the second element, which is a real impatience. If you think about people like Jack or Ben, they see the world should look a certain way, and the world doesn't look that way. And they want to make the change so that the world looks that way. And so those are the success stories, but there are many entrepreneurs that we've invested in who had those same qualities, and they ended up not succeeding. So it's not sufficient for success. And tied to that passion, for me, my biggest miss was Uber by far. And the reason why I passed on Uber was because a great investor once told me, they said, you can't outsource passion. When the idea is separate from the founder, when somebody comes up with the idea but somebody else executes on the idea, that's usually not a good recipe. And in this case, I had actually worked for Garrett Camp. Uber was his idea. And we would have a drink, and he would talk about, I'm going to do this thing with a cab ride, and you can just order a black car, and it was great. But when he pitched it to me, somebody else was running it. And that I didn't like. I didn't like the separation of the two. And obviously,
there's always an exception to the rule.
I don't look so smart, but I do believe in that you can't outsource passion.
But I think there's an important message here, is that if it was easy to pick winners, everyone would be doing it. And the reason that we do this is because we have that passion. We want to see those companies succeed, but you have to be willing to fail. And this goes back to the larger story about corporate, entities investing. You have to be willing to make those investments, knowing that a lot of them are going to fail, and not knowing what's going to ultimately succeed. But if you don't start somewhere, you're never going to get there.
Interesting. So I just wanted to hear short comments on the very recent trends going on in the internet/technology venture space. Can a young company with few number of employees be really worth $18 billion? And I start to question, because no one is really questioning. Everybody is praising Mark Zuckerberg for being so smart. Larry Ellison was very positive about the acquisition. But from someone outside the internet perspective, it seems to be somewhat overpriced. But you can come up with arguments about 500 million users, how much they're worth, blah, blah, blah. But an Airbnb, you guys just raised money for at a valuation of $10 billion, was it? Isn't everything like being overpriced lately?
Well, I can't comment on WhatsApp or Facebook, but the way I think about WhatsApp and Facebook, I don't think of the price. I think of, is WhatsApp worth 10% of Facebook? And for me, if you think about it that way, that you can come to a different answer than, is 19 billion too much? And so one of our views is that I talked earlier about what's going to happen in the next 10 years of technology. I think if you think about the last tech cycle, there were 500 million people online and all had 56K modem. That's in the world. And in 3 years, there will be 4 to 5 billion smartphones in the world. And if that, I do think there's a correlation to the market opportunity. And so whether or not 10 billion is too much, whether or not they're going to grow into that valuation, that's up to debate. But to suggest that, but to just look at the raw number, and technology always grows the pie. Every single technology cycle, the market size has always been bigger. And so it's really hard for me to say whether or not it's overpriced or are we in a bubble, but I do believe that the next 5 years will be something that we haven't seen before.
If I may, Jerry Yang said, those of you who were here this morning when Jerry spoke, Jerry Yang said that the next 5 to 10 years are going to see more transformation and more opportunity than he saw when he started Yahoo in the 1990s. I was actually one of the early employees at Yahoo. I was actually an in-house attorney. I was a komon bengoshi, and Jerry was my client. And I remember at the time, we thought we were changing the world. We were changing the world. I mean, it was all new. It was super exciting. And then to hear Jerry today say, that was nothing. That was nothing. That was just the appetizer. The main course is coming. The opportunity in front of us all is so gigantic. And what David was saying about billions of people having a computer, when you think that your smartphone has more computing power than the Apollo 11 that went to the moon, and everyone on the planet's going to have that, your brain just starts to melt. I don't know how they translated that because no one laughed.
Akio, so why is it that we aren't seeing the likes of WhatsApp or Airbnb or startups of that scale, maybe aside from Rakuten and SoftBank here in Japan? What is it that's prohibited? And we debate about this a lot in various conferences.
Sure, but actually, before I answer that, can I actually get back to your last question about WhatsApp? So I want, こちらの、僕の iPad のスクリーンもう一度出して。
I want to see my iPad screen again. Can you please switch screen?
映像の方、iPad の。
Can you please connect to my iPad screen? Thank you.
So let me actually tell you a little story about what's happening next door in China. So this is their chat application, Wechat, and we talked about a little bit about this earlier in the morning session, but actually I want to give you some images so they have some idea what's going on. So they actually added this new feature to add your bank card to a chat application. And here you actually enter your, debit card number, and then I think you get SMS verification to verify it's your card. Then after that, you get access to those commerce functions inside the messaging app. So here, you can actually recharge your mobile phone card. And actually, the second one in the top that has the thunder-like signal is the Li Cai Tong. And this is actually, you can actually buy investment products right inside the mobile app. And then you can call taxi, buy game points, book restaurants, movie theater tickets. All those commerce functions are available. Now, if they just added function, it's great. And anybody with some technology skills can add function. So that's, I think it's nothing. But what's interesting is actually what happened in the last 3 months. So if I go back to the earlier screenshot. So Tencent is, of course, the creator of Wechat, but they actually invested in another company. So this is actually a case of seeding the ecosystem called Didi Dacha. And Didi is actually not like Uber. They're not for booking black cards, but this is actually booking normal taxi in China. And today, if you go to any of the major cities, like all those yellow dots actually represent taxi cars with this app installed. So drivers are available to pick you up. Now what's interesting was that Tencent teamed up with this small startup that just got started like less than 2 years ago, a small team in Beijing. And they came up with some crazy subsidy program. So they said, okay, let's make everybody in China start using mobile payment. So what they did, this is in the last 3 months, just before the Chinese New Year, was that they started subsidizing mobile payment for this taxi booking app. Let's say your taxi ride was $2 US. I'm just giving a rough equivalent so it's easier to understand. And if you book your mobile app, and if you pay through Tencent's mobile payment system that's part of their chat application, WeChat, as a consumer, your $2 cab ride becomes $1 because they'll give you $1 subsidy. So suddenly, you can actually, for a short ride in China, you can actually get it for half. It's amazing. So a lot of consumers realize, wow, this is a good deal, so I'm going to start using mobile payment. But if you just did that, taxi driver said, hey, well, I don't want to do this mobile payment. It's kind of cumbersome. I'd rather take cash. So there's no incentive for taxi drivers to accept mobile payment. So Tencent made it sweet for the taxi drivers too. So for the $2 ride, for example, taxi driver will get additional $1. So suddenly, $2 ride becomes a $3 if the taxi driver accepts mobile payment. I'm actually only giving the rough approximation. So Tencent decided to subsidize both consumer side and driver side. So basically for every $2 ride, they're actually giving $1 to each driver and the taxi driver and the consumer. And of course, what happened was this, along with the Chinese Red Pocket Money campaign they did, they actually added 200 million users to this mobile ecosystem. And I think at the peak, they're doing about 5 million transactions a day on mobile payment. And this is far bigger than what's ever happened in Japan and US in mobile payment today. So this is what wasn't happening 3 months ago, but this is an example, big company with some crazy marketing spending power, working with a tiny startup, changing a big, making a huge change. And who got freaked out by all of this, of course, is Alibaba, because Alibaba used to think, oh, we have all the payment, and they were number one. But they realized that suddenly, in a very short period of time, Tencent came up on the radar screen, and actually on the mobile payment side, it went right past them. And I think this is an example of what's happening with a big company, small company. But if you look at these kind of examples, you can actually see there's actually a lot of value, I think, unlocked inside WhatsApp. I don't necessarily think they're going this way, but there's actually a lot of value.
Great. So I'll skip my second question in light of time because we have about 10 minutes to go. Maybe going back to the very first question I raised about what does this all mean for us here in Japan? What what is there to take away? And I'm sure there are many participants in the audience, not just from the venture community, but also from large corporations, as well as some of our policymakers in the government. What should we take away from this, everything we've discussed today? And I'm outsourcing the summary wrap-up to you guys.
What you should take away from this is that there's a lot of opportunity out there. There's a lot of opportunity as an entrepreneur. There's a lot of opportunity as investors. There's lots of opportunity as a large corporation. We've only seen the tip of the iceberg. Hyozan no ikaku shika mita koto ga nai.
And in your view, is there anything the government can do to accelerate this, or should they just step away?
The government can help by getting out of the way. I hope that was translated accurately. The government can get out of the way. That's what a free market economy means.
邪魔をしないでください.
Yes.
Is what you mean?
Yes. But there are also things that it can do in terms of creating structural, corporate governance, things that will make it easier for capital to become available and to be invested. So there are both sides of it.
Okay. David, before Akio, maybe.
I think that's a good place for me to start. I think, many people overseas ask me, how can you import Silicon Valley? And I'm not sure if that's the right way to think about it, because part of what makes Silicon Valley so successful and the American entrepreneurial spirit is a culture and a history of entrepreneurialism and a legal system that is a byproduct of that culture, history, and heritage. And every country has their own strengths and weaknesses. And so I'm not sure if looking at the American system is the best way or is the right inspiration. I think you can draw the right pieces. But what I will say is that the two ingredients that you need for a great technology company are you need a great leader or a great founder and a great product, and you need great technical talent. And I think that technical talent is global. And that exists here in Japan, that exists in China, that exists in America. I don't think any country has a monopoly on that. And in this age where, mobile, everybody thinks location is the killer application of mobile, it's actually that mobile kills location and makes location less important. I think it is as exciting time as ever for any global startup to start a company and attack some of these technological problems with a great workforce and great ideas.
Tanaka-san, if the Chinese can do it, why can't we?
I think there's a important, aspect that's actually missing here in Japan. So China is definitely not a free economy, and actually there's all kinds of weird regulatory barriers. But I think there's some interesting thing that the Chinese entrepreneurs are doing, and of course American entrepreneurs have been doing that, which is actually challenge the government in some ways. For example, the taxi booking app I showed you, actually they violated all kinds of regulations in China. I think they still are, but they don't give up. They keep fighting back. And I think Uber's actually success in the US is definitely not smooth. They actually were battling gangsters and governments and all the dark forces behind the taxi industry in every city pretty much they went into. And I think often we hear in Japan, this is not doable. It's the government doesn't allow it. And I think we need to actually push the envelope. And in some cases, you go into areas that the laws don't exist, but if you're actually creating consumer benefit and actually is doing the right thing, I think it will change. And US, actually, Uber has changed taxi regulation in some markets already successfully, still fighting in many others. And even in China, now government realized the consumers actually find this convenience much more useful than the traditional phoning and waiting for taxis that never show up. So I think us as an entrepreneur here, if you actually push the envelope, I think it's also, you end up becoming the force of change.
Just real quick,
Okay.
Something that you just said, I wanted to follow up on. One of the phrases in Japanese that I hate,
しょうがない.
How did you know?
I was thinking about the same thing.
I hate the phrase "shoganai." You tell someone, "Oh, you should try this." "Oh, I can't. There's regulation, or that's just not the way it's done." Shoganai. It's like I always want to say "shoga aru." Do something. Why? It's that way. It exists because people say "shoganai," because they don't want to change it, or they're not willing to change it. So I think that's a great point.
Okay, so we have maybe time for one question from the floor. If there's anyone urging, please. And please keep your question crisp. そちらの手を挙げてられている方お願いします。質問端的にお願いします。
Please make it crisp. Yes, I'll be speaking Japanese. Venture capitalists today are investing mostly in internet and are not investing much in production or manufacturing, and they're not investing very much in technologies. And I think that's the impression I got from listening to your presentations. The social media business uses Amazon servers, etc., and can be run very inexpensively, and that's why everyone is going in that direction. But I think we need more investment in startups that manufacture and produce physical goods, but that's not being done. And the same kind of phenomena is seeing in Silicon Valley. So I would like to ask the venture capitalists to invest more in technology and production, to support and give mentorship to production technology. In the United States, I think maybe Tesla Motors or SpaceX, those are only the very few technology startups that have ample investment being injected. You're going to have to invest more in these technology production companies. Otherwise, the whole world would be playing with their iPhones and nobody would be manufacturing any products anymore.
About this before, and the shift from David was mentioning the shift from software to more hardware and technology. So maybe you can comment.
I can't agree more, because one of the things, and part of the reason why I'm so excited for the next 5 to 10 years, if you think about, I think the last 5 years has been about software, social media, and that's because I think technology and design has become a lot more accessible to entrepreneurs. So you didn't need a deep technical background. But I think in the next 5 to 10 years, if you think about technologies like 3D printing, drones, food replacement, Bitcoin, genomics, I think the biggest opportunity for the next 10 years, you talk about cheap, abundant data. Google did it with text, Facebook did it with photos, somebody will do it with the intersection of genomic data and software. And so I agree 100%, and that's part of the reason why it's so exciting, where you think of drones, virtual reality, 3D printing, transportation. I think you're going to see just a sea change in the next 5 to 10 years, and that's an area where we will be spending a lot of time.
Thank you. So we're running out of time now, and I would like to wrap up very briefly. I don't want to oversimplify a very rich discussion that we've had today. I think there was a takeaway for everyone in the room. May you be from large corporations, from the government, or from the entrepreneurial community. The need to look beyond maybe Silicon Valley, study more China. So I think there's a lot to take away from the session. Maybe 15-second final remark from each of you, from George and David, and then we'll finish up with you, Akio. I'll give you 10 seconds.
Me?
Final comments to the floor.
Final comments. Thank you again for having me this year. This is my second time coming to the Shin Keizai Renmei. I hope I get invited to come back next year. I hope I didn't offend too many people. But I want to make sure that if I come back next year, I want to see more women executives, more women venture capitalists. I want to see more venture capital funds, and I want to see more entrepreneurs, and I want to see more M&A activity. I know it was a long list, but I want to see that. It's possible, it's going to happen, but it's up to every one of you in the room to make it happen.
I also want to thank Mikitani-san and NES and Rakuten for this great event. This is my first time to Tokyo. I believe that I talked about what we think will happen in the next 10 years, and I also think it will be a global occurrence, and that's why I'm trying to spend more time in Asia and different parts of the world. And so I believe technology is a great equalizer. And whatever country you live in, whatever political system you live in, if you have a great idea and a great product, that can attract great talent. And those are the ingredients for any global technology company.
So just from my perspective, I think actually it's great that Japan has a forum like this summit. And I think, I think for the longest time, I think Japan's been controlled by all the status quo and all companies who didn't want things to change. So I'm very, very encouraged that Mikitani-san actually started this movement so that the voices of the new economy is now finally being heard. And I'm actually hoping that everybody here, when you live here, actually carry that spirit with you and please become forces of change. Don't make things stay the same.
しょうがある。
しょうがある。
それでは、最後にもう一度パネリストの皆さんに拍手で、終わる。
So could we have a final round of applause for the panelists? Thank you very much.